If you want to die alone and penniless, go ahead. But as long as I'm here, I won't let you ruin everything I've built for you. Because yes, Lucille, what you have, you owe to me." That's what my daughter, Regina Smith, said in the middle of the dining room, her arms crossed and her gaze fixed like a knife. She didn't yell. She didn't have to. Her tone was sharper than any shriek. And the worst part wasn't that she said it, but that she said it in front of Camilla, my granddaughter. If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it has reached. Camilla fell silent. She was 16 years old, and though she already understood many things about the world, she'd never seen her mother speak to me like that. Or maybe she had, but never with such bluntness, never with such a lack of shame. I lowered my gaze, not because I was embarrassed, but because I needed a second. A second, not to explode. I took the napkin that was on my lap, folded it carefully, and placed it to the side of the plate. The food had gone cold, but no one noticed. I didn't say a single word. I slowly got up from the table, not like someone fleeing, not like someone who feels defeated, but like someone who finally understands that the war is no longer silent, that it's time to make some noise. Regina followed me with her eyes as if she expected me to respond. I didn't look at her. I went straight to the hall closet, opened the top door, and took out an old wooden box, the same one no one had touched since my husband's 80th. Camilla took a step toward me. "Grandma, I'm okay, my dear." I answered without smiling. My daughter scoffed. "And now what? One of your dramatic displays? Are you going to write a letter to make us feel guilty?" I ignored her. I went back to the table, picked up my cup of cold tea, and headed to the porch. I sat in front of the garden and listened to the birds. I took a deep breath, and in my mind, a single question drummed like a drum. How did we get here? Because it wasn't always like this. I wasn't always a burden, nor was I always that old woman who supposedly couldn't manage her own bank account. I wasn't always looked at as if I were a piece of old furniture they didn't know whether to throw out or hide. There was a time when I was the pillar of this family, and now I was invisible. But if life taught me anything, it's that pillars don't disappear. When pillars break, they drag down everything that's on top of them. It all began long before that scene in the dining room, long before I was treated as if I had no right to decide what to do with my money, with my house, with my life. And if I'm sure of anything, it's that this story doesn't end with tears. It ends with justice. Years ago, I was Lucille Salazar, a literature teacher at a public school in upstate New York. I taught with my whole soul. I married Arthur, a meticulous and kind accountant who taught me to save from our first month together. We didn't have luxuries, but we never lacked for anything. With effort, we built a decent life, 2 used cars, a modest but our own little house, and small investments that Arthur managed with patience. Regina grew up looking at her father with respect, but also with a certain impatience. She didn't understand why we didn't travel more, why we didn't move to a more modern area. Having is different from showing off, Arthur would tell her, and showing off is always having. But Regina had another vision, more ambitious, more dangerous. When Arthur died 20 years ago, I was devastated. I was 48 years old, Regina just 23. And although she swore she would support me, it wasn't long before she began to see me as a project. "Mom, you can't stay alone in that big house," she told me once. "Come live with me. We'll take care of each other. Naively, I accepted. I sold the house. We put the money in a joint account to make everything easier, as she said. And at first it worked. We lived peacefully. Camila was just a baby and spent hours in my arms. But the years passed. Camila grew up. And with each year, Regina became harder, more controlling. The first time I noticed something was when I wanted to buy a reading chair. Not an expensive one, just a simple, comfortable chair, the kind you put next to a lamp to read. Easy now. What for, Mom? We already have armchairs. Besides, that's an unnecessary expense. But it's my money, Regina. Not exactly. It's money that's in a joint account, remember? That was the beginning. After that came more things. She canceled my debit card for safety. She asked me not to go out alone. She changed the doctor's number without telling me. And one day, while checking the bank statement that she accidentally left on the table, I saw a large expense for a real estate agency in my name. It was then that I understood that something was very wrong, but I still had no proof. I still had no way to prove anything until I met old Mr. Eugene Peterson. He lived 2 houses down from ours. I'd always seen him from a distance. An older man, elegant, always with his hat and his wooden cane. We never exchanged more than a good morning, until one day, during a morning walk, we sat on the same bench in the local park, and that's where it all began. But I'll tell you that later, because before Eugene came into the picture, I had to endure things no mother should ever have to hear. Like that afternoon when I asked Regina if I could invite my old colleagues over for coffee. As soon as I finished speaking, she frowned and said, "Coffee here, Mom. You don't understand that this isn't your house anymore. It's mine. You're here because I allow it." And she smiled, not with affection, but with arrogance. That was the first time I felt fear, not for myself, but for what Regina was teaching Camila. And that's why I decided that if there was a war, I wasn't going to lose it. When Regina was born, I didn't know that a daughter could break your heart without raising her voice. I didn't know it when she looked at me for the first time, or when I taught her to walk. Not even when she left home at 18 with that borrowed suitcase and her eyes full of the future. I found out much later when I realized that what hurts the most isn't contempt, but indifference. But before all that, Regina was my son, my first and only true love after Arthur. She was an intelligent girl, quick to speak, to give her opinion, to question everything. I raised her with books, not with dolls. While other girls played with toy kitchens, she listened to Edgar Allan Poe's stories and talked about going to college. She said she'd be a lawyer or a businesswoman. I'd look at her and think that maybe Arthur and I had done something right, because she seemed to have wings. In high school, she began to distance herself. She no longer wanted me to walk her to school. She was ashamed of my simple clothes, of my low-heeled shoes. "All the other moms dress up. You look like a small-town teacher," she once told me. And of course, I was exactly that, a small-town teacher, because that's what I was, and what I'd always been. But that was the first scratch. Then came the deeper cuts. When her father died, our world collapsed. Arthur had a fatal heart attack while reviewing accounts at his desk. I found him with his head on the calculator, as if he'd fallen asleep. He had a sheet in his hand with the month's expenses. I cried for weeks. Regina didn't. She locked herself in her room with the music turned up. She blamed me, although she never said it out loud. If you hadn't insisted on that mortgage, if you hadn't pressured him about the roof repairs, thoughts that floated in the air unsaid, but could be felt. During the funeral, I realized something. Regina didn't cry, not a single tear. She received the guests as if she were the hostess of an elegant dinner party. She even smiled that night. While I was cleaning the kitchen, she came over and said, "We have to sell the house. You can't stay here alone. It's dangerous." I nodded. I didn't have the strength to argue, but I also didn't suspect that behind that proposal would come the most elegant and cruel cage anyone had ever built for their own mother. We moved to a more modern house, in a more exclusive neighborhood, thanks to the money from the sale. She insisted we put it in her name to avoid legal problems. She also said we'd open a shared account to better manage expenses. I trusted her. I always trusted her. How could I not trust my own daughter? The first few years weren't bad. She worked a lot. She had a financial consulting firm, or so she said, and spent hours on the phone. Camila was born shortly after, and I became her natural babysitter. Regina thanked me in her own way. She left me in charge of everything: the food, the bath, school, bedtime stories. She told me that she couldn't do it without me, and I felt useful, alive. It didn't bother me that she used my money to maintain the house, because after all, it was for all of us. I saw it as an investment in love. But over time, the thanks turned into demands. The demands turned into orders, and the orders turned into contempt. One day, I asked if I could go visit an old friend, Estelle, who was sick in California. Regina frowned and said, "And why are you going to see a woman who's dying? You should stay and help with Camilla. Besides, we don't have money for those whims." A whim? Visiting a dying friend was a whim to her. I didn't answer, but that word stuck in my throat like a thorn. I was no longer a mother who helped. I was a burden who got in the way. And so the silence began. I stopped asking for things. I stopped expressing wishes. I became a kind ghost who cooked, swept, and told stories. Camilla was my refuge, my treasure, and for her, I endured everything. The humiliations, the snubs, the looks of superiority, because in silence, I held on to the hope that my granddaughter wouldn't turn into her mother. But the contempt didn't stop. It began to be more obvious. If we invited someone over, Regina would ask me not to talk too much. "Mom, don't say old-fashioned things, please." If I wore my old clothes, she would say I looked like a beggar. If I read my books in the living room, she would say I was making a mess. Everything I did was an annoyance, even existing. One day, I overheard a conversation that wasn't meant for my ears. Regina was on the phone with a friend. "Yes, she lives with me. No, she doesn't pay for anything, but she doesn't bother me much either. As long as she doesn't cause problems, I let her stay. You know how old people are. They think they're entitled just because they gave birth." I felt the ground open up under my feet, because it wasn't anger I felt. It was sadness, pure, deep sadness, because that was my daughter, the same one I gave everything to, the same one for whom I sold my house. I gave up my space and allowed her to use my name to open accounts that I couldn't touch. From that day on, I started saving things, taking notes. I saved receipts, photocopied bank statements, and wrote down suspicious movements, not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed to protect myself. Something told me that the worst was yet to come. And then, one day, unexpectedly, Mr. Peterson appeared. I met him on the park bench, as I told you before. He greeted me with a good morning and a sincere smile. He asked if he could sit down. I, surprised by his courtesy, nodded. We talked about birds, the weather, the book I had in my hands. It was an old copy of a classic novel with yellowed pages. "That line is brutal," he said, pointing to a page. I love you not for who you are, but for who I am when I am with you. I looked at him with caution, not because of distrust, but because it had been years since anyone had spoken to me with that level of sensitivity, much less a man. Eugene was a widower. He had been a public notary for more than 30 years. He had a daughter who lived in California and an old dog named Sparky. But the most important thing wasn't his biography. It was his gaze. He saw. He really saw. And the first thing he saw was my sadness. After several conversations, one morning he said something unexpected. "Lucille, if you ever need help with documents, accounts, or any legal matter, I still have my contacts, and my head is still sharp." I didn't answer him, but that night I didn't sleep because I understood that for the first time in years, someone was offering me something without expecting anything in return. Weeks passed. Every time we spoke, Eugene would ask me, about my story, not about Regina. He listened to me, he made me feel like a person, and after years of being invisible, that's a kind of miracle. One day, I dared. I brought him a folder with copies of documents, handed it to him in a paper bag, and said, "You don't have to read it now, but I need to know if this is legal." Eugene didn't say anything. He just nodded. He looked at me with respect, with the kind of respect that can't be faked. That night, I not only slept, I dreamed. I dreamed of a house with a garden, with my own window, with a space to read without fear of being interrupted. I dreamed of the Lucille I once was, and I knew she wasn't dead. She was waiting for the right moment. Because if there's one thing I learned from books, it's that happy endings don't exist. But delayed justice does. For a long time, I repeated to myself that I was doing it for Camila, that enduring humiliations was part of the price of keeping us united. But there comes a moment in life when even love stops being enough to justify the pain. That moment arrived on a gray afternoon while I was trying to bake a cake for my granddaughter's birthday. Regina had organized an intimate party, as she called it. She invited colleagues, neighbors, and Camilla's friends from private school. Everything was very modern, very elegant, and even though she asked me not to get involved, I wanted to bake a cake like the ones I used to make. Camilla's favorite, a 3-milk cake with walnuts and cinnamon. I went into the kitchen while the house was still asleep. It was my only moment of peace. That brief interval before the noise of cell phones, complaints, and orders began. I prepared everything carefully, as if by doing so, I could reclaim a little of the mother and grandmother I once was. But while I was beating the mixture, Regina came in. She was wearing a silk bathrobe and holding a steaming cup of coffee. "What are you doing?" she asked emotionlessly. "The cake for Cammy," I answered without looking directly at her. She sighed with annoyance, walked over to the sink, put down her cup, and said in a cold voice, "I already ordered one from the bakery. I don't want the house to smell like grease. And besides, I don't want them to think we can't afford a decent cake." The words hit me harder than a shout. I don't want them to think. That phrase revealed more than it said. I wasn't part of the plan. My gesture wasn't welcome. I was a nuisance, even when I was trying to give love. "I just thought she'd be excited," I whispered. "Lucille," she said with that tone she used when she spoke to me as if I were a silly child. "Stop with these things. We're not in the 70s anymore. Today, everything is ordered. We don't need your cakes or your recipes." I stood still with the wooden spoon suspended in the air. She left the kitchen as if she hadn't just trampled on a memory. In silence, I poured the mixture down the drain and washed the dishes with trembling hands. That was the first irreparable crack. Throughout the day, I was invisible in my own house. Nobody introduced me. Nobody thanked me. I was kept in the kitchen like another employee. And the worst part was seeing Camilla smile when she received the store-bought cake. Without looking for me, I realized that even she was starting to forget about me. The following weeks were a succession of more subtle but constant snubs. Regina started to block me from domestic decisions. She changed the bank passwords for safety, and she reorganized the rooms without consulting me. She asked me not to pick Camilla up from school because you might say something inappropriate again. And then came the cruelest one of all. She imposed a living together schedule on me. Yes, as if I were an annoying visitor. Mom, we need structure. That's why I'd like you to have dinner in your room from now on. Camilla needs her space, and you also deserve a rest. In other words, she was banishing me. From that moment on, I began to eat alone on a tray in silence, as if I were in a prison decorated with expensive cushions. Eugene became my only way out. We would see each other at the park or at his house, where he'd offer me coffee and cookies and listen to me. I would tell him everything. Every word I couldn't say at home, I would confide in him. He was my confessor, my witness, my anchor. One day, I asked him something that had been gnawing at me. Is this legal? Can she keep everything? Eugene was silent for a long time. Then he took some documents he had reviewed out of his briefcase. Legal? On paper, yes, but morally it's theft. She used your trust, manipulated the accounts, and forged signatures in some cases. And if you wanted to, you could reverse it. I was frozen. Reverse it? Yes, but you need proof. You need to be more clever than she is, because Regina isn't stupid. She's brilliant, cold, and knows how to protect herself. If you confront her without weapons, she'll destroy you. I nodded. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a choice. From then on, I began to gather information meticulously, without raising suspicion. I asked Eugene to teach me how to use a small recorder. I carried it hidden in my apron pocket. I recorded conversations, complaints, phrases like, "You don't understand anything about money," or "I decided for you because you no longer know how." One afternoon, I pretended to forget a doctor's appointment so that Regina would get annoyed. And as expected, she exploded. "You're so irresponsible. You can't even manage an agenda anymore. I take care of you, I feed you, and on top of that, I have to deal with your forgetfulness. You can't even handle your accounts, Lucille. That's why I took control." The recorder captured every word. That night, I cried. Not from sadness, but because I had proof. It was a drop in the ocean, but it was something. Little by little, I put together a file with receipts, screenshots, audio recordings, statements, and even some documents that Eugene helped me understand. The more I discovered, the more I realized the extent of her control. She had made financial transactions in my name without my consent. She'd mortgaged the new house to finance her business. She had applied for loans in my name, and all of this with a smile on her face, telling me it was for the common good. Regina had crossed an invisible line. She was no longer just an ungrateful daughter. She was a usurper, a woman who built her empire on the foundation of my trust. The day I found the most revealing document, I trembled. It was a life insurance policy where I was the insured and Regina was the sole beneficiary. The date was just a month earlier. I didn't want to imagine things. I didn't want to fall into paranoia. But something in my stomach churned. How far was she capable of going? That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling for hours. I went over every word, every gesture, every silence of the last few years and understood something that broke me from the inside. Regina had not only stopped loving me, she never forgave me for having been an insufficient mother, and now she was punishing me for it. At dawn, I made a decision. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of destroying me. I would rise up with proof, with patience, with strategy, because as Eugene told me, it's not enough to be right. You have to know when to use it. That day was approaching. Very soon, Regina Smith would discover that she had underestimated the wrong person, because I'm a Salazar too. And when Salazars fall, they get up stronger. From the moment I decided to fight, something inside me changed. It wasn't a sudden change or a burst of anger. It was more of a silent transformation, like when water starts to boil without you noticing. Every day I woke up with a different purpose: to observe, to listen, to document. I was no longer a wounded mother. I had become a witness to my own story. Eugene helped me understand the legal steps, but beyond the legal side, he taught me to believe that I could still think clearly, that my age was not a limitation, that the years I'd lived were, in fact, my greatest advantage. Young people rely on their speed. We rely on patience. And Lucille, that's a power they don't understand. Our first strategy was simple. Continue with the facade. Don't confront. Don't change routines. Don't arouse suspicion. That was the most difficult part. Looking Regina in the eyes and pretending gratitude while planning my escape required more strength than any physical pain I had ever felt. But I learned to master the art of being silent without giving in. The days passed, and I accumulated evidence: photographs of documents, recordings of conversations, bank statements. Camila, although no longer as close, began to notice my presence in a different way. One day she sat next to me while I was knitting and, without looking at me, asked, "Grandma, why don't you talk as much anymore?" I looked at her with tenderness and answered as honestly as I could. Because sometimes talking hurts more than being silent. She lowered her head and didn't say anything else, but that night she left a folded note under my door. In childish letters, it said, "I miss you. I'm sorry if I've failed you." I kept that note as if it were a treasure. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected call. It was from a woman named Maria Davis, an accountant who had briefly worked with Regina. She had seen a comment of mine on an old social media post, a recipe for flan that I had posted years ago, and she decided to contact me privately. "I need to warn you about something," she said in a worried tone. We met at a discreet coffee shop. Maria revealed to me that while working with Regina, she had noticed irregular movements: misappropriation of funds, manipulation of contracts, altered signatures. At first, she didn't say anything, thinking it was a mistake, but when she confronted Regina, she was fired the next day. She's smart, Lucille, but she's also arrogant. She thinks no one can touch her. She has a web of lies so well woven that anyone would get tangled up. But I'm not afraid. If you need a testimony, here I am. I left that meeting with my heart pounding. It was the first time someone else, besides Eugene and me, had spoken out loud about what was happening. It was no longer a perception. It was real, tangible. That same week, Eugene and I devised a more concrete plan. We were going to file a formal lawsuit for fraudulent management and abuse of trust. But we needed something stronger than papers. We needed a strong witness, someone who could talk about my mental state, my capacity, to counteract Regina's narrative, who was already starting to build the image of a mother with signs of cognitive decline. It was then that we contacted Dr. Robert Basabe, an old neurologist who had treated me a couple of years earlier after a fall. I visited him under the pretext of a checkup. After a detailed evaluation, he wrote a report that made it clear. Mrs. Lucille Salazar retains all her mental faculties. She shows no signs of dementia or significant cognitive impairment. That document became a silent weapon. I kept it like a card up my sleeve, waiting for the right moment. While all that was happening, the tension at home was increasing. Regina became more irritable, more impatient. She started talking about selling the house to move to a safer condo. Eugene warned me that this could be a trap. With the sale, she would likely transfer all the money to an account that was not in my name. "We can't let that sale happen," he told me. "If it goes through, it will be more difficult to get anything back." So I had to make a more radical decision. I faked a fainting spell. It was a risky but effective act. In the middle of dinner, I dropped my fork, put my hand on my chest, and collapsed. Camila screamed. Regina called 911. They took me to the hospital. There, I took the opportunity to contact a lawyer friend of Eugene's who visited me, pretending to be a doctor. In that white room, I signed the legal power of attorney to initiate the lawsuit. I also signed the revocation of the financial control that Regina had assumed. It was a moment of silent freedom. No one in that hospital knew what was happening. But in that bed, for the first time, I felt that I was the owner of my own destiny again. When I returned home, everything seemed the same. But it wasn't. And the most ironic thing of all was that Regina, confident that my health was in decline, let her guard down. She spoke to me condescendingly, almost as if I were a sick child. She even started arranging a legal guardian with one of her lawyer friends. I listened to her, nodded, and inside, I counted the days. The moment was approaching. The hearing was set for 3 weeks later. Eugene and I continued to gather material. Maria, the accountant, agreed to record a video testimony. Robert, the doctor, prepared his written statement, and Camila began to ask uncomfortable questions. "Mom, why can't Grandma use her own money?" "Because she doesn't know how to manage it, my love. We've talked about this." "But you didn't know how to either. You said you were good at it." Regina looked at her harshly. "Camila, it's not your business." That night, I found my granddaughter sitting on the stairs, crying in silence. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" "I don't want you to leave, Grandma. I feel like something bad is going to happen." I hugged her tightly. I told her I wouldn't leave, that sometimes to protect what you love, you have to be silent a little longer, but that soon everything would change. And it did. A week before the hearing, we received a letter from Regina's lawyers, an attempt at intimidation. They said that if we proceeded, she would sue for defamation. Eugene smiled when he read it. "This is fear, Lucille. She knows she can't stop you." I nodded. I was no longer afraid. I no longer doubted, because the power she stole from me. I was recovering step by step, not with violence, not with shouts, but with truth, with patience, with dignity. And she didn't yet know that the worst thing for her wouldn't be the trial, but what would come after. Because in every lie she built, she left a crack, and little by little, I learned to see them all. The day of the hearing dawned with a gray sky. It wasn't raining, but the air had that metallic smell that announces storms. I woke up early as always, but this time not to make coffee or sweep the patio. This time I dressed with the same calm with which one gets ready to bury something, not someone, but an illusion, the illusion that blood always binds. Eugene was waiting for me at the entrance. He carried a folder in his hand and a discreet but firm smile. In the car, we didn't talk. The silence was comfortable. Sometimes words get in the way when the truth is about to be revealed. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Regina arrived with her lawyer, a young man with an arrogant air. She was dressed in black as if she were a grieving victim. She looked at me with that mix of pity and superiority that she had perfected over the years. But this time, I didn't lower my gaze. I held it. And when our eyes met, for the first time, I saw a shadow of doubt in hers. The judge, an older man with a tired expression, called for silence. The case was read aloud. Lucille Salazar, plaintiff against Regina Smith for fraudulent administration of assets, abuse of trust, and legal identity theft. The words fell like stones. Regina's lawyer protested, saying that everything was a misunderstanding, that I was not in the mental condition to handle my affairs. It was then that Eugene handed over Dr. Basabi's report. The judge read it in silence. According to this document, Mrs. Salazar is in full possession of her faculties. Do you have anything to say, Mrs. Smith? She didn't respond. Her lawyer asked for a recess. During the recess, Camila appeared in the hallway. She wasn't supposed to be there, but she had insisted on coming. She hugged me in silence. She was still a child, but her presence held me up as if she were a whole wall. When we returned to the room, the defense tried to change the focus. They said that everything I had signed in the past was of my own desire, that they never pressured me. But then we presented the bank statements, the evidence of misappropriation, the documents with clearly forged signatures. Maria was called to testify by video conference. Her testimony was clear, forceful, and devastating. I saw how she manipulated the accounts. I was fired when I asked questions. I've never seen anything so brazen, she said without hesitation. After her, Dr. Basabe also spoke. His tone was serene, scientific, but full of humanity. Lucille is perfectly capable. I've known her for years. There's no medical basis to doubt her judgment. Regina's face hardened with every word. At the end of the day, the judge decided to suspend the hearing to review all the material. He gave us a date for the final verdict, but the damage was already done. Regina's carefully constructed image had begun to crumble. That night at home, the tension was unbearable. As soon as she walked through the door, Regina exploded. "You don't understand what you've done. You've ruined me." I didn't answer her. It was pointless. I just walked to my room, but before I closed the door, I heard her sharp, venomous voice. "You know what? If I'm going down, you're coming with me." That phrase kept me awake. I knew it wasn't an empty threat. The next day, the real attacks began. Regina sent letters to neighbors and relatives talking about my instability. She said that I was suffering from delusions, that I was being manipulated by an opportunist, referring to Eugene, and that everything I was doing was the result of senile confusion. She posted messages on social media, insinuating that I had mistreated my deceased husband, that I had a shady past. She even went so far as to invent that I had hit her when she was a child. The first to react was my sister Helen, who lived in another city. "What's going on, Lucille? Why is Regina saying these things?" I told her the whole truth. Helen was silent. Then she told me, "I always knew something wasn't right with that girl, but I didn't imagine she'd go so far." Despite everything, I remained calm. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't stoop to her level. I focused on preparing the final defense. Eugene and I knew that the verdict could be for or against us, but we also knew that we had planted the seed of doubt, and that in a world where appearances are everything was powerful. A few days later, I received an unexpected visit. Camila came into my room with swollen eyes. She held a school notebook in her hands. Grandma, I found this in Mom's drawer. It was a small, hardcover journal. I opened it carefully. The first pages were empty, but halfway through, I found notes. Dates, names, bank transactions. It was a log, one that Regina kept in secret. She wrote down everything, how much money she took out, what accounts she transferred it to, and even conversations with her lawyer about how to legally take the house from me. My granddaughter didn't understand the scope of what she had found, but I did. That journal was the missing piece. Eugene looked at it with gloves on, made copies, and digitized it. It was direct proof not only of fraud, but of premeditation. The day of the verdict arrived with a strange air. This time there was no doubt. Everyone there knew that something big was going to happen. The judge spoke for several minutes. He acknowledged the evidence, the testimony of the experts, the journal, and the psychological manipulation. In the end, he ruled in my favor. He declared that the financial decisions made by Regina were invalid, that she had to return the embezzled funds, and that a criminal investigation would be opened. Regina remained motionless. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just got up and left. I remained seated in silence. I didn't feel euphoria. I felt a deep sadness, as if I had just closed a chapter that should never have existed. In the car, Eugene looked at me. "You did it, Lucille." I gently shook my head. No. What I did was recover my voice, but the wound, that still hasn't healed. That night, I sat on the porch with a blanket over my legs. Camila came over with a cup of tea. She sat next to me, didn't say anything, just rested her head on my shoulder. And in that silent gesture, I felt that something in my soul was beginning to heal. But there was still one more card to play, because Regina, though wounded, hadn't finished her gamicha, and I was no longer willing to live in fear. The days that followed the verdict were a strange mix of relief and confusion. Legally, I had won, but inside, the victory tasted bitter. I had recovered my money, my properties, and even the respect of those who once thought I was going crazy. However, what hurt the most wasn't what I had lost, but what would never return. The trust in my daughter. Regina didn't return home. She left without saying goodbye, taking only a suitcase and her wounded pride. Camilla stayed with me by her own decision. At first, I thought it was temporary, that she would soon miss her mother, but no. With each passing day, I noticed she was calmer, more alive, as if something inside her had also been released. One morning, as we were making breakfast together, she looked at me seriously. "Grandma, can Mom go to jail?" I answered her with the truth. Yes, if the criminal investigation continued its course and they found enough evidence, Regina could face a sentence. But I also knew that she was clever and that she would do everything possible to evade justice. And she did. A few weeks later, we began to receive visits from strange people. Some posed as insurance agents, others as surveyors. But they always asked the same questions, trying to find out if I was alone, if I had access to my accounts, if I trusted my new lawyer friend. Eugene recommended that we increase our security. We changed locks and installed cameras. It all felt like a movie, but we knew what Regina was capable of. It wasn't just ambition. It was a desire for absolute control, for not accepting that she had lost. One afternoon, upon returning from the market, we found the house in disarray. There were no signs of forced entry, but someone had been in. Documents were missing, copies of the verdict and the original journal that Camilla had found. Eugene had scanned it and saved it to a secure cloud. But the message was clear. Regina wasn't going to stop. We didn't report the incident. We knew that she had ways to cover her tracks, but something inside me lit up, a force I hadn't felt in years. I decided to speak up. For years, I had lived in silence out of shame, fear, and worry about what people would say. But now I understood that my silence was the weapon she used to destroy me. So one morning, I went to the local radio station. I met the director, an older man who had been a friend of my deceased husband. I told him everything from the beginning. "Are you sure, Lucille? This could unleash a storm." "Let it," I replied. "I'm tired of the storms staying inside me." The show aired that night. It was a calm interview, without scandal, but with a truth that hurt. I spoke as a mother, as a woman, as a victim, and the reaction was immediate. The next day, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Older women, many like me, called to thank me, to tell me that they had also been manipulated by their children, that they had also been made to feel useless. Someone recorded the interview and uploaded it to the internet. In a matter of days, it went viral. What started as a local testimony became a national echo. I was interviewed on TV channels and invited to forums on the rights of older adults. I gave talks at community centers, and although at first I felt out of place, I began to notice something powerful. My story had strength because it was real, because it hurt, because others were living it too. Regina, seeing all this, flew into a rage. She started a smear campaign. She created fake profiles on social media where she said I was a liar, a failed actress who only wanted fame. She accused me of wanting to steal her daughter, of having manipulated Camila against her, of even inventing that I had hit her when she was a child. But Camila didn't let herself be intimidated. One night, as we were sitting in the living room, she said, "I want to talk too. I want to tell what I lived through with Mom." I asked her if she was sure. She was. We recorded a homemade video, without production, without makeup, just her and her truth. She talked about the screaming, the lies, about how her mother made her feel like a burden, about how she forced her to lie for her, about how little by little she had learned to be afraid of her. That video was even more powerful than the radio interview because the voice of a sincere teenager has a power that no strategy can defeat. The media picked it up, they replicated it, and with that, public opinion turned against Regina. The criminal investigation was reactivated with force. New evidence came to light. A former business partner of Regina's at a real estate company testified that she routinely forged signatures. Another person accused her of taking over properties from sick older adults. It was as if a wall had collapsed and everything that had been hidden came out from behind it. But the most unexpected thing happened at the final hearing of the criminal case. It was public and there were media present. Regina came in with her face covered in makeup, as if that could hide the truth. I sat on the other side of the room without makeup, with my wrinkles, my gray hair, and my dignity intact. The prosecutor presented all the charges: fraud, forgery, abuse of trust. But before he finished, Camila asked to speak. The judge hesitated. She was a minor, but they allowed her to speak. "I just want to say that for years I believed that everything bad that happened to me was my fault, that if Mom yelled at me, it was because I wasn't good enough, that if she disrespected my grandmother, it was because she deserved that disrespect, but I was wrong. What I lived through was abuse, and I don't want to be silent about it anymore." There was a long silence. No one breathed. Regina didn't look up. When the hearing ended, the judge didn't rule at that moment. He postponed it for a few more days, but it no longer mattered because the truth couldn't be hidden. That night, I went back home with Camila. As we walked in, I saw a letter on the table with no return address. I opened it. It was from Regina. I don't know when you became my enemy, but I don't care anymore. I'm leaving. You won't hear from me again. Take care of yourself. Or don't. I don't care. I didn't feel anger. I felt pity for her, for all that she had lost, for the mother she never wanted to have. And then, in that silence, I knew that the storm had finally passed. After that letter, several days passed without us hearing anything from Regina. She didn't call, she didn't write, and she didn't try to see Camila. It was as if she had vanished, and for the first time in a long time, the house breathed peace. At first, Camila slept with the light on. She would wake up in the middle of the night, afraid that her mother would appear screaming, but little by little, her dreams calmed down. The routine made sense again. We studied, cooked together, and laughed at simple things. We were two people again, inhabiting a space without fear. One day, as we were hanging clothes in the backyard, she looked at me in silence and said something that broke my heart. I never thought that being calm was also a way of being happy. I told her that was exactly what I had forgotten too. For a long time, I believed I was less. I thought that by growing old, I lost rights, value, and my voice, that I should be grateful for scraps, endure disrespect, and pretend that everything was fine so as not to inconvenience anyone. But the truth is that I was broken, and now, after so much, I felt alive. Not completely, not entirely, but at least beginning to remember who I had been before all the pain. Eugene continued to come to the house often, not as a lawyer, but as a friend. We shared coffee in the afternoons, talked about books, history, and things with no weight. Sometimes he would bring cakes from the downtown bakery. Other times, he would stay in silence, looking at the garden while I watered the plants. He never asked me about Regina, and he never forced conversations. He was just there. And that simple presence was perhaps what helped me heal the most. One morning, he took me to an event at the local university. They were going to present a campaign about abuse toward older adults, and the project coordinator had heard my story on the radio. They asked me to give a few words. At first, I hesitated. I didn't consider myself a speaker, but Eugene encouraged me. "You don't need speeches," he told me. "Just talk the way you talk to me." That day, in front of an auditorium full of young people, I told them what I had lived through. Without embellishments, without exaggerations, just the truth. Some students cried, and others hugged me afterward. One came up to me to say that their grandmother also lived in fear, and that now they understood things they hadn't seen before. It was then that the project coordinator proposed something unexpected to me, to be part of an awareness program. They offered me to visit community centers, share my experience with other older women, and create spaces for dialogue where they could speak without being judged. At first, I doubted what I could offer beyond my story, but I accepted. For the next few months, I traveled to towns and neighborhoods. I spoke with dozens of women. Some cried upon hearing me. Others would approach me timidly and in a low voice say, "That happened to me too." With each testimony, I understood that what happened to me was not an exception. It was a silent epidemic. In one of those meetings, a woman with white hair and a sweet gaze approached me, took my hands firmly, and said, "Thank you for speaking. I've been feeling invisible for years, and today, for the first time, I felt seen." Those words stood out to me because that was exactly what I had been looking for all this time, to be seen, to be heard, not for fame or revenge, but to recover what had been taken from me without me even realizing it. My place in the world. Camila also changed. She started therapy and wanted to understand what she had lived through. Sometimes she would come back from her sessions quietly, processing, but other times she would hug me suddenly, and in those silent hugs, we healed together. The final verdict against Regina came 3 months later. 3 years of probation, plus full restitution of the embezzled money. She wouldn't go to prison, but she was registered as guilty of financial and psychological abuse against a vulnerable person. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel satisfaction, just a necessary closure. Regina didn't show up for the hearing. Her lawyer claimed that she was out of the country. I didn't know if it was true, and honestly, I didn't want to know. I had stopped looking for her in my thoughts. I had let go of the desire for explanations. She took her path, and I took mine. One night, as we were returning home after a talk, Camilla asked me, "Do you think Mom will ever regret it?" I didn't know what to answer her. Maybe she will. Maybe she won't. The only thing I know is that regret cannot be forced, and that life, sooner or later, will confront our actions. Over time, the Awareness Project grew. It became a support network. Women of different ages began to organize. Some opened helplines, others wrote public letters. It became a movement. I just kept telling my story. I didn't become an expert. I didn't pretend to be an example. But every time someone told me, "You helped me understand that I'm not alone," I felt that everything I had lived through had been worth it. Camila wrote an essay for her school about everything she learned. She titled it, "Bravery Doesn't Always Yell." It was selected for a student publication. When I read it, I cried, not from sadness, but from the depth of her words. Because in every sentence, I understood that my granddaughter had grown up without losing her tenderness. My home, which was once a cage, became a refuge again. I planted new flowers in the garden, rearranged my books, and learned to use my cell phone without help. I even opened a social media account to share quotes and thoughts. Eugene taught me how to handle technology with patience. "There's no age to start," he used to tell me. One afternoon, I received a private message. It was from a 71-year-old woman in Arizona. She wrote, "I saw your story by chance. You made me find my courage. Today, I reported my son. I don't know what's going to happen, but I no longer feel like a coward." That day, I understood that speaking up had not only saved me, it had ignited other lights. It had built bridges, and even though the wound with Regina was still open, it was no longer a black hole that swallowed me. It was a scar. It hurt to touch it, yes, but it was also a testament to what I survived. Sometimes at night, I still wake up remembering harsh words, but then I get up, walk through the house, and see Camila sleeping peacefully. I see the photos that adorn the living room, the letters from women I never met but who shared their souls with me. And then I smile because I understood something I had forgotten, that my life still has chapters to be written, that my story didn't end when they called me useless, that there are still paths to walk, and that as long as I have a voice, I'll use it. Winter arrived with a gentle but constant cold, the kind that doesn't freeze the skin but does chill the memories. Every time I saw Camilla sitting next to the heater with a blanket and her drawing notebook, I thought about how far we had come since that afternoon when she ran to hug me in tears. The past was still there, like a shadow that sometimes stretched over the present, but it no longer devoured everything. We had learned to live with the memory without letting it suffocate us. One ordinary afternoon, as we were cooking together, the doorbell rang. I opened the door without much thought, and in front of me, as if time had taken a sharp turn, stood Regina. She wore an elegant coat, dark glasses, and her lips were tense. There was no trace of exhaustion on her face, but a dryness that I didn't know if it was pain or arrogance. "I need to talk to you," she said bluntly. I let her in, not out of courtesy, not out of nostalgia, but because I was no longer afraid of her. Camila went up to her room in silence, her gaze fixed on the floor. Regina sat on the edge of the sofa as if she didn't know whether to sink into it or stay rigid. "I came to see my daughter," she finally said, "but I guess that's no longer possible." I looked at her in silence. I didn't respond. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she continued. "I just want you to know that I didn't do it out of malice. I wanted to protect you. I thought you were losing your mind, that you didn't know how to handle your life." That was the first time I felt true pity for her. "What you did," I told her, "wasn't protection. It was control. It was selfishness. It was cruelty." Regina lowered her gaze. The silence between us grew thick. Then she took an envelope from her purse and left it on the table. "It's a power of attorney. I'm giving up any claim to accounts, properties, rights, everything. It's all yours, so you don't think I want anything." She took a breath as if she was going to say something else, but she held back. She slowly stood up, and when she got to the door, she stopped. "I saw an interview with you online," she said without turning around. "I never imagined that you would speak in public, that people would listen to you. Maybe I never really knew you." And she left. That night, I didn't sleep, not from anguish, but from a strange mix of relief and sadness. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I saw her as she was as a child, with her pigtails, with her loud laugh. And then I remembered her cold words, her pitiless decisions. The two images couldn't fit together. Camila didn't want to talk about the visit. She just hugged me. And I understood that sometimes forgiveness doesn't come with words, but with actions, with moving forward, with not repeating history. The next day, Eugene came for lunch. I told him everything. He didn't advise me. He didn't offer an opinion. He just listened. And that was enough. "The important thing," he said while pouring the coffee, "is that she no longer has power over you, neither legally nor emotionally." He was right. Weeks passed. Routine returned. The workshops with older women continued. Camilla finished her school year with honors. I felt stronger every day, more in control of my story. And then an unexpected invitation arrived. The local government wanted to hold a commemorative event for International Older Persons Day. They proposed that I be one of the main speakers. I hesitated, but I accepted. The auditorium was full. Many of the women I had met in the workshops were there. Some wore violet scarves, a symbol of the fight against violence toward older adults. When they called me to the stage, my hands were trembling, but my voice wasn't. "My name is Lucille Salazar," I said, and for a long time I let them make me believe that growing old was becoming invisible. But today I am here to say that we are not. We are not alone, and every story that rises up paves the way for another. The ovation was long, not for me but for all of us, for those who spoke, for those who still don't dare, for those who couldn't do it in time. After the event, a woman came up to me with tears in her eyes. Her name was Ophelia. She was 76 years old. She told me that she had lived with her grandson and daughter-in-law for 5 years, without the right to decide what to eat, what time to go to bed, or even what clothes to wear. And that thanks to hearing my story on the radio, she had asked for help. Now she lived in a dignified residence, surrounded by other women who were also rebuilding their lives. That day, I understood that I had not only survived, I had transformed my pain into something useful, into a beacon. We returned home with our hearts full. Camilla looked at me with pride. Eugene accompanied us as always, and as we closed the door behind us, I felt that we were leaving something behind, not just an event, but an entire stage of our lives. In the days that followed, I received more letters, and more calls. Women from all over the country wanted to share their stories. They asked me to read them, to comment on them, to be with them, and although sometimes I felt overwhelmed, I did it. Because if I didn't listen to them, who would? A local channel proposed that I record a series of conversations with older women who had experienced family abuse. It wasn't a sensationalist show. It was intimate, respectful. I accepted, but only if I could do it my way. With pauses, with silence, with space to cry without rushing. It became a powerful space. Anonymous women became role models. Stories that were once silenced now had names and faces. Camila began to accompany me. She didn't talk much, but her presence was firm. She would draw while she listened. Then she would show me her illustrations. Hands intertwined, eyes that cried, but also shined, doors that opened. Sometimes I think she understood the meaning of all this more than anyone. One night, as we were going through letters at the table, she said to me, "Grandma, you're like those lights that come on the highways. They don't prevent the potholes, but they help you not to fall so deep." I cried, because I never imagined that surviving would make me a guide for others. And although sometimes in the early hours of the morning, the past whispers to me in a low voice, I answer back loudly because I am no longer afraid. Because every word I share is a brick in the new house I am building. My name is Lucille Salazar, and this is only one part of my story. Months after that event, when the echo of the applause had faded and the auditorium lights had dimmed in my memory, I began to notice that something new had been lit within me. It wasn't a quick flame or a fleeting flash. It was a firm clarity, a quiet impulse. It was no longer just about my story. It was something bigger, a slow but unstoppable movement. Older women from different parts of the country wrote to me. Some sent me handwritten letters with smudged ink and shaky spelling, but full of truth. Others would find me at the end of the workshops with a whisper on their lips and held back tears. They wanted to tell their stories, not for revenge, not to denounce, but to name themselves, to reclaim themselves. It was then that I decided to do something I never thought I would do. Organize a listening circle, not a therapy group, not an institution, but a space, a refuge. We met once a week in the community hall of the cultural center. At first, there were 6 of us, then 20, then 35. Women between 60 and 90 years old, many with canes, others in wheelchairs, some with broken gazes, others with a timid laugh that barely showed, all with stories they had kept silent for decades. I didn't talk much. I just opened the circle, lit a symbolic candle, and said, "Today, here, no one is alone." Sometimes we would cry together. Other times we would laugh loudly, surprised by what we were still capable of feeling. And in each meeting, something was repaired, something invisible but profound. In one of those sessions, a woman named Ramona shared how her daughter took her house, left her in a room without a window, and forbade her from having visitors. She said it with a trembling voice, looking at the floor. When she finished, she looked up and said, "I thought I was going to die without telling anyone this." That day, I understood that words can be an act of resistance. Camila, always attentive, began to design small cards with phrases that the women said in the circles. We printed them on cardboard with simple drawings. They became a kind of symbol of the group. Some carried them in their purses. Others stuck them on the refrigerator or put them next to their bed. Phrases like, "Today I slept without guilt. I have the right to decide my end. My voice is valuable, even if it trembles." They weren't phrases from books. They were our phrases. Live. One afternoon, upon returning from the circle, I found a letter in the mailbox. It had no return address. It just said, Lucille, in small handwriting. It was from Regina. I didn't open it immediately. I left it on the table for 3 days. Finally, one morning, with the house silent, I read it. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't justify anything. It said that she had started attending a reflection group for family members of older people, that she had understood many things too late, that she didn't expect reconciliation, but she did want me to know that she was trying to be a better person. It closed with a phrase that hurt and relieved me at the same time. I'm not the daughter you deserved, but I'm trying not to be the mother my daughter doesn't deserve. I didn't know what to feel. Maybe because sometimes you don't need an immediate answer. You just need to let time do its work. Days later, I saw her from a distance at a community event. She was with a younger woman, probably her daughter, Camilla. Our eyes met for just a second. There were no gestures, no words, but there was a different silence, less charged, more human. Things with Camilla kept growing. She was no longer the fearful child who hid under the covers. Now she asked questions. She questioned. She decided. One day she told me that she wanted to study something related to social justice, not because she felt obligated, but because it came from within. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up, Grandma." And in that moment, I knew that everything, absolutely everything, had been worth it. In the circle, we began to prepare something special, a silent march for the dignity of older women. No loud banners, no loudspeakers, just a slow walk together, in white clothes with flowers in our hands. It wasn't a protest. It was an affirmation. We wanted to make ourselves visible without asking for permission, to walk for ourselves, for those who didn't make it, for those who are still silent. The day of the march, the sun was shining but not scorching. There were more than 100 of us, women with white hair, with slow steps, some holding their friends' arms, others pushed by young caregivers who were crying. There was silence. We passed in front of the town hall, in front of the square, in front of the cultural center. People stopped to look at us. Some applauded. Others came over to hug their mothers or grandmothers. A little girl let go of her mother's hand, ran to one of us and said, "You are pretty like a queen." The woman smiled with tears in her eyes. That afternoon, upon returning home, Camilla looked at me and said, "Today, you changed history, Grandma." And for the first time in a long time, I felt that it was true. That history was not just what was done to us, but what we decided to do with what was done to us, that we could take the ruins and build something dignified, not perfect, but alive. From that day on, I stopped calling myself a victim in my mind. Not because what I had lived through wasn't unjust, but because I chose to be the author of my present. I began to live with the certainty that every act of dignity, no matter how small, adds up, that every boundary we set, every no we say in mime is a seed. I don't know how much more time I have left in this world. It doesn't worry me. What does matter to me is that Camilla grows up knowing that her voice has weight, that her kindness is a strength, that respect is not begged for but demanded, and that no one should ever be ashamed of growing old. I was a mother, a grandmother, invisible, betrayed, silenced, but I was also a witness, a warrior, an ally, and now I am a living memory. Because resisting is not just enduring, it is transforming. And I finally transformed. The names and places in this story have been changed to protect the identities of those involved. We do not share this to judge, but in the hope that someone will pause and reflect on how many mothers are silently suffering within their own homes. I truly wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose silence to preserve peace, or would you dare to confront everything in order to reclaim your voice? I long to hear your thoughts, because every story is like a candle that can light the path for someone else. I firmly believe that God always blesses, and that courage leads us toward brighter days. As we close, I leave you with two of the channel's most beloved stories. I am certain they will surprise and inspire you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.